Perfect. Yeah, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 people in. All right, so for all of you tuning in at, it's what time, Lars? Remind me. Evening sometime.
7:00 p.m. So we have
7 o'clock. Yeah, so
9 hours time difference, I think.
I see. I appreciate one of you tuning in from your private jet. I really appreciate that. You know, it's you're getting really good Wi-Fi from 30,000 feet up in the air. But yeah, it's fun to be able to do these things virtually, at least as a silver lining to the coronavirus. And I've managed to hang out with a lot of people from around the world this last month or so. So it's really cool to just connect with people globally. And let me just go ahead and share my screen and talk about what we'll be covering for the next hour or so. Cool stuff that I've been building. There we go. Yeah, so just as a brief mention before I give a little background on myself, the primary topics we'll be covering for tonight is going to be just talking about things in Power BI as far as new visualizations, layering, design, like aesthetics, things that you can do to kind of supercharge or upgrade your reports, and clever ways to use visuals and other items in Power BI that maybe don't necessarily have like an out-of-box feature, so it doesn't just seem obvious to do it this way. But there's a lot of clever things to do in Power BI that gives it a really unique look and adds a lot of features that aren't just natively available in it. And that's we'll go over into the actual things I'm covering in just a minute, but let me just give a little background to myself for those who aren't familiar with me. So similar to Lars, I'm a Microsoft MVP. I should be in about a month or so getting my 3rd year renewal for that. And I've been in this space for 7 years doing data analytics. I've owned a business for the last 5, and I've been working full-time for my own business for the last 3. And I'd say that the specialty that I kind of lean on is visual design and like the report layer aesthetics and kind of look and feel, and really data storytelling for those familiar with that term. I do really the end-to-end gamut of everything, but I find that there's a much more crowded field of people who do modeling and DAX calculations and everything else, because there's a ton of people who do all that work, and there's a lot of consultants out there who do that, and myself included, we all do a great job on it. But I find that there's significantly less people who focus on visuals and like the design of them and the artistic aspect. So that's a market that I've been very happy to kind of corner myself into. I do a lot of work with just Power BI. That's basically my bread and butter. Most of the work that I do is all related to that, whether or not it's back end or front end. And I both do development training, and I actually teach at a few colleges here locally in Seattle, Washington, where I'm from. So really cover the entire gamut of everything related to the tool, and certainly find a lot of pleasure from teaching people as well as just helping to build out really cool stuff for customers. All right, let's talk about what we'll be going over in the next hour or so. The great thing that I like about this presentation is that it's very modular. So I can build it out for as much time or as little time as I have. I can scale this down to a 45-minute talk. I can scale this up to a 2-hour talk if I wanted to. The nice thing with the topics that you see in front of you here is we will cover some of them, but even the ones that we don't cover for the longer sessions that I normally do, I still have YouTube videos for these. That's actually one thing that I do as part of my business development is I release a YouTube video every Tuesday. So you'll get links to this at the end of the presentation. But each Tuesday I release a 5 to 10 minute video on anything related to Power BI, new features, best practices. So a lot of really cool stuff. I actually just passed my milestone of 100 videos on there. So there's a large amount of content that's posted to the channel. More than likely, we will be covering the majority of the stuff we see over on the left, the native visualizations and features. But again, anything that doesn't get covered, there will be a YouTube video link to actually watch later on that will provide you the knowledge for some of these other topics that we don't cover today. All right. And most of this is going to be demos, so I'm just going to go ahead and hop into it. And we have a small enough group, so what I will do with a lot of these, I will do a demonstration. I will then kind of switch over to a question period and maybe spend a couple of minutes for any questions or comments that people have. But one thing I like to do with each of these techniques to kind of get some involvement from you is maybe asking you how I did like this thing that I'm showing and see if you can figure out the technique. Actually, let me just go ahead and hide my taskbar. Make the screen a little bigger. There we go. All right. So for this one, the thing that I've done essentially is I've created a line chart on Power BI, but there's some additional things added that normally aren't available natively with Power BI desktop for this specific visual. And that's these little conditional formatting, like KPI dots that are on here. So the line chart, if I'm just going to show you the format pane, does not actually have any option to conditionally format these. This is not available as a feature for line charts. Just is not there. Normally there would be a little icon here or a little ellipses that would allow me to apply conditional formatting. So before I show you how I did it, can anybody take a guess on how I might have implemented this to get these to show up? And if nobody has an idea, I can certainly just show it, but it's always fun to see if somebody can actually guess what I did. All right. In that case, let me go ahead and show you. So I would say this was kind of a failed successfully. It was a happy accident that I stumbled across to actually figure out how to do this. So in Power BI, you can very easily and quickly swap between visuals in Power BI. Like that's one of the nice things is as you put data in, you can kind of test out how does my data look on a column chart? How does my data look on a line chart, etc. So I started out originally with a line chart, or sorry, with a column chart. And the column chart, has the bars, just similarly represented as the line. However, the columns themselves do have an option to set a measure-based conditional formatting in here. Come on. Whenever I'm presenting, the things always take a few extra seconds to pop up just because of the CPU load. But you can see here, standard formatting rules were applied. I basically created, 33, 66, 100% conditional colors to apply to this. And the trick essentially is the fact that if you start with this visual or another visual that allows you for the columns to apply conditional formatting, and then you change it afterwards to a line chart, that keeps the conditional formatting. Now, with this technique, I did want to check first with Microsoft because it kind of seemed like a bug. Like, seems like this was missed and it shouldn't happen. Because otherwise, if they wanted you to have conditional formatting, they would include that over on the data colors. Like they would give you the option to add it, and it shouldn't be kind of have to be hacked this way. So I checked with the Microsoft team and wanted to verify first. Hey, is this something that you're going to fix in the future now that that I'm telling you about it, or is this going to be? Are you going to keep this in the desktop app? And they told me that they're not going to get rid of it. So it's for the reason that I don't want to deliver this to a customer and then in 6 to 12 months have this break or have this disappear. It's very, it looks bad on the consultant when you deliver a feature that then goes away. So this is one of those things that, yeah, it seems a bit like a bug, but it will not be taken out of Power BI. In a perfect world, they will just give you the option to add it over here, but at least there is a way to add those conditional dots at the top. You are limited for the fact that they're going to be circular dots. You can't change the size of them or the shape, but you can still specify the color. And it, does help to create, buckets for, quadrants if you're trying to indicate anything related to a status or something else that I'm representing here. There is another technique that I want to show you on this page, but before I do that, I just want to pause for a moment and ask if anybody has a question on the conditional formatting that I just showed. And you're welcome. Normally, just unmute if you do. With larger groups, I usually just stick to the comment thread and have the moderator kind of read them off to me. But yeah, any of you, whenever you need to chime in, feel free just to unmute and throw a comment in. All right. So another thing that I want to show on here is something that I really, really like as a feature that came into Power BI. What it is something called Visual Header Tooltips. So that's something that came out in June of last year. And that's this little icon that's up here at the top. So what it allows you to do is add some helper text to the visual. This is per visual, so you can add, and this is just generated text that I put into there. But it allows you to give notes on the visual, explaining what it does, how it works, something that helps guide it. So the default version of this, just to show you some of this in here. And I will point out, as when I use this tool 8 hours a day, I find little eccentricities or little annoyances. And to me, the way to turn this on is very hard to find, so I'm partially annoyed by it. You'll notice right now I have a menu for Visual Header Tooltip that's already visible. However, it's not always visible. This thing has to be turned on for this menu to even pop up in the first place. To even get it to show up, you have to come to the visual header menu here. You have to scroll down, keep scrolling, and you have to turn it on here first to then get this menu to show up. Honestly, this should, I think should just be at the top of this menu right here. This menu should always be visible, and then this thing should just have a toggle of on or off there at the top. So if you've never used it, it kind of takes a minute to figure out that it even exists. A lot of people don't, but it's extremely useful. Now, essentially the upgrade that I gave this, by default, if I just want to show text, plain text, you can type whatever you want in here as notes. Those notes show up. Now, the limit to this, though, is you are limited to exactly 250 characters or less. If you ever want to show any more than that, you're just out of luck. Like, that's the limit of this. The text is also not, it is non-rich text, meaning you can't italicize it, you can't bold it, and you cannot underline it. So it's basic text that just reads as a string. So to get it kind of around that, if you want a richer text box field, you can instead create a report tooltip page. Now, the creation of that page itself is outside of the scope of this demo that I'm showing, but I want to show you the usefulness of it. If you've not made a report tooltip page before, you're welcome to ask me at the end of class, and I have a YouTube video explaining exactly that. But I'm just going to go ahead and attach a page down here that I've already built that looks like a tooltip page. So info tooltip. This now has broader amounts of text because a tooltip page can be customized to any width, any height, and I can include text, visuals, basically anything I want to. It's a blank canvas of a small report page that I can then have render over this visual. So now I have more text that can come into there if I wanted to. Some of these I can underline, I can italicize, I can bold. So like there's a lot of ways to customize the fields in here, and basically design and format this however you want to create a richer tooltip page. The downside, of course, is now each visual that you want a tooltip on, you would need a hidden page. But as far as file size, bloat, or anything else, these pages don't really add more than 100 kilobytes or so, and they don't reduce the speed of the report until you actually render it by hovering over here. So this report page, if I attached 85 tooltips in the header of all of these, that report page will not render any slower. And the only time it actually has any performance impact is when you hover over one of them, and then it renders it in real time. So it's still a great thing to implement. Just the one caveat, or the one downside, so to speak, is you just have more hidden pages. But I think that's a pretty small and minor inconvenience for the developer, because once they're built, you don't ever have to do anything else to them besides just have them sit there or make an edit to them if the wording never needs to be changed. All right, before I switch on to demo 2 for this evening, are there any questions on visual header tooltips or that little page that I had linked to it?
So I found that tooltips also very cool, but learned the hard way also about the size limit you mentioned. That's a big point. What I am asking myself here at the moment is, do I get any kind of filter context if I use a report tooltip?
That's a really great question. That was the first thing that I looked for. So the question is, is there any filter context from the visual that can be fed into the visual header tooltip? Because a report tooltip on the visual, if you built one, it passes through the category or whatever filters when you hover over the elements. And the first thing that I wanted to build in a visual header tooltip was some ability for it to capture the hierarchy level or something else like that. And unfortunately, there's nothing that's captured. There's no visual name or anything else. Because again, the other thing that I was trying to figure out is, could I build one page with a text box that somehow shows different rows of text from a single table? Somehow build one tooltip that services all pages and have it identify the name of the the visual that it's being rendered over. And I couldn't find anything easy to identify that outside of making some advanced calculations or other things that honestly would take more effort than just making separate pages. So it's a really great question. It would be great if there was some way for this to identify the visual name and then and allow you to use that for something dynamic. But in its current version, it doesn't pass through any kind of filter back to the page, other than it just renders it.
Did you also try, if you set a filter on a custom on the visual level, not that filter is also not passed through, or so maybe I have here 4 years on my axis. If that filter context is passed through the tooltip.
Yeah, good question. At least I haven't tested it probably in 7 or 8 months when it originally came out for that feature. But when I first tested it, if I were to filter this, I did not see that filter show up in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I thought of maybe creating a measure that would return some value, and if it shows 1 or 2 or 3, I could somehow give a name to each or a value to each visual to then dynamically do it, and I couldn't figure out a way to pass that through. So that is a limitation, and I think that's one of those that I've mentioned to the team, the Power BI team, of like, hey, this would be a good like version 2 to be able to somehow at least have the visual filters from the filters pane be passed into this.
The last idea would be to catch the language of the browser, but even that is also not possible. Also, so that we could make multilingual report tooltips, but I don't know of any way in Power BI to get the language. You get the user principal name, but not the browser language or any kind of that.
That is a good question. Yeah, I've switched a lot of things dynamically online as far as like trying to identify users and everything. But yeah, I don't think you can grab it from the browser.
No, I don't think.
Yeah, that would be if somebody could figure out how to do that, that would be a great article. Any other questions?
I'm thinking about. You can hear me? Yeah. Okay, I unmuted myself. You were talking about filter context of the visual itself, Jochen, right? But
yes,
only the data points have filter context, not the visual itself.
Yeah, the visual could have a filter. If I did this, if I did that, that's a visual on the entire filter, but that still doesn't pass through to this, as an example.
So with that trick, you could put a measure with the name of the visual or something like that and pass it through, but have also to play with it.
Exactly, and because that's what I was hoping. I was really hoping a visual level filter in the pane would somehow funnel to this, because it's applying it not at the category level, it's applying it on the whole visual level, but they ignore it at the moment. But I'm hoping they update it to accept those in the future.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to go ahead, pop over to number 2. Some of you might have seen this one. This is probably one of my more popular visuals that I built. I won't take credit for the idea of the design of it, but I did find a good way to use a native visual to build it in Power BI. This actually came about because I started a few years ago building out a report based on Google Analytics data for my website, for my business. And one of the visuals that they had on their site for Google was this heat map that was by day of week and hour of day. And I was like, that's really a useful visual. I really like the spread and the distribution, and it's a great way just to see like what times and days are people, visiting the most and visiting the least. I thought it was a really unique looking visual, and it worked really well with those 2 time dimensions, or date and time dimensions. And I started my journey with this. All right, that's cool. How do I do it in Power BI? All right, step 1, are there any native visuals that do this? Well, not really. Okay, well, I checked the custom visual store, and there are a couple of heat map visuals in there, but they are fairly limited in the number of features they have, how much can be customized. A lot of them didn't accept report tooltips, so there was just a lot of limitations to custom visuals. I'm not saying like never use them. I do find that there are certainly a few custom visuals out there that are very useful for some of their techniques and design. But the downfall is very often they're going to be a bit slower. They just require more time to render. Maybe the Java wasn't optimized quite as much, or if they don't get updated, they might not support a new feature. Because every time Power BI comes out with a new feature, it doesn't just automatically work with some of the custom visuals. The custom visual team would have to update the code to allow that, like a visual header tooltip or certain types of report tooltips. That's not just native, that has to be included in the code. So I wanted to really see if I could use a native visual to build this out. And one of the probably the most customizable visuals in Power BI Desktop is the the matrix visual. That's something that I think a lot of people just consider to be a table, but there's actually a lot of really interesting ways to use this. You can kind of use this to create a series of cards with a single visual to reduce the number of unique visuals on a page. You can use this for a heat map. There's actually a lot of ways to turn this table into a visualization just because of the sheer number of ways that you can format, tweak, and shape it. So it's a really customizable option in Power BI that I think this is a great way to show the types of things you can build with it. Now, before I essentially colorized it, it started out looking like this. So same data, just of course a lot less intuitive and much harder to find the highs and the lows. So to start with, I'm just going to go ahead and let's give it some background color, and then I want to see if you can guess what I did to finish off the product. Everything goes slower. Come on, there you go. Let's go from more of a neutral blue to blue. All right. That's step one. I like it, but it still has data labels. And to me, the goal of this is not to show the number, it's to show the distribution, and it's to show the patterns. So it's a bit noisy having both. There's no option in the this visual to go in here somewhere. There's no data label turn on or off. If I look for data, everything, there we go. Yeah, there's no data label in here. So how do you think I turned off the data labels in the visual to get rid of those numbers?
Conditional formatting.
On the data.
Give it the same color as the background.
Yep, exactly. So you can actually layer on more than one conditional formatting per value at the same time. So it's basically layering it. It is accomplishing the exact same goal because you're coloring the font the same as the background. So yes, like there's not something where you can just natively go in and say turn off, but this will give the same effect. And when I made this too, I hadn't really thought of adding more than one conditional format at the same time. It never just, in my brain, it never occurred to me. But as I was thinking about this, like, what, maybe I could try this. And, I assumed you had to pick one or the other. So same effect is achieved. The numbers are scrubbed. They're still there. They're just essentially invisible. And if you really needed the actual value, you still have a tooltip to hover to get that for you. So great way to both see how the table heat map or matrix visual can be turned into a visual itself rather than just a table. And it also shows you the benefit of sometimes layering on more than one conditional format. And even the fact that you can do that natively. Very easy way to set up, and very quick. And honestly, like there's no reason to ever really use the heat map that's a custom visual, just because this will do it for you anyways. This one's pretty quick and straightforward, but again, really cool effect, at least in my opinion. Are there any questions on this one? Not, I will switch on to topic number 3. There you are. Beautiful. Of all the ones that I showed, this was probably the most common client request that I got. And it's coming from a consultant universe that where I do a lot of projects that involve people going from ClickView to Power BI or Spotfire or Tableau or any other reporting tool. You very commonly get well, this tool did this thing. How do I do this thing in Power BI? And there are quite a few other visualization tools that allow you to show a stacked column chart like we see here. However, they have the option to have a grand total at the top. I think it's a very reasonable request to want to be able to know the exact number. The problem is, like, sure, I can kind of eyeball this and say it's 800 and something, but without this label here, I have no way to actually know the grand total. Like, I don't want to sit there and do mental math and add up all of these numbers to get it. So How do you think I got this grand total here at the top of the of this stack column chart? Because there's no option to say turn on grand total.
Second
Maybe you
axis
can add
is
a line chart.
color.
I heard a couple. I heard the word line chart.
I was thinking of adding a line chart with no color and just the data labels.
Yes, so I did something very similar initially. So the first version of this that I built a couple of years ago, I had two visuals layered on top of each other. And the one that was on the top was essentially a second column chart with or line chart where everything else was made transparent except for the data labels. And so it worked very, very well. But it required two visualizations on the page. And each time you add a visual, the report page will start to render slower and slower. It unfortunately, and just as a pro tip, web browsers are single threaded. So if you have 85 visuals on your page, it's not going to load all of them at the same time. It puts them in a queue and it loads them one after the other. So the more visuals you have can actually drastically slow down performance of your page. Even if you have a really fast model, you can still spend 90% of your time for the page to load just having all of your visuals render in HTML5. So whenever you have the option to, it's best to kind of consolidate and reduce the number of unique visuals that you have. And in this case, I managed to do this with one single visualization. This one
With a combo chart.
Exactly. Same kind of effect. The reason I didn't think about this until I actually did a demo of this a couple of years ago, and somebody showed me the trick to get this to work. I still think it's kind of a weird option, the reason that this even works with a combo chart. But yes, a combo chart will achieve the effect that we have. That one right there. So let me start with stack column and kind of show you what we do to basically get this effect in here. I'm going to take that regular stack column chart, change it to a, there we go, stacked combo. Take that same page value, done, put that in my line values. So starting there, like we're kind of getting where we can at least conceptualize where it's going to land, but we need to do a bit of formatting to get that to show up. So go over to Format Painter, start by turning on the data labels. There we go. So some of them show up. The line ones are early showing up. However, there's a thing I want to mention, and this is good to. This is a good example of making sure that you test all the buttons before your user to make sure that there's no environment that they can encounter that kind of breaks. So in this case, if we actually test focus mode, okay, well, that's actually not what I want at all. Like, you might want this, but I personally, I don't want all these subtotal labels. Like, that's really, really noisy. The only thing that I care about is the grand total at the top. So if they ever went into focus mode, to me, this would get noisy. It would not look good. So I want to make sure that those are turned off. So to do that, I'm going to come to data labels, scroll down to customize series, and I'm not going to do every one because my computer is running a little slow with presenting at the moment. But what you would do is you would turn off here, you would disable this on everything except the page views there at the bottom. That would turn off the data labels for focus mode. So all of those are disabled. In this case, this would be the last one that you're actually showing. Now, for page views, the couple things we want to customize, though, is notice that there's some above, some below. It's not quite the position that you want. So as long as you set that to above, getting closer. Some of them are still getting cut off because of that little kind of bubble that goes around it. So we can go ahead and turn off the background. There we go. Okay, much cleaner. We're getting close, but we still have the line that I want to get rid of. So the first thing that I thought to do on this, and one of the reasons I didn't use it versus stacking two visuals is, all right, well, the line's there. Okay, well, like what I can do maybe is I can color it. I can maybe color it white or do something else to kind of get it to disappear a little bit, but then you have those white lines kind of cutting through this. Here's the trick that I never would have thought to do. To me, as a developer, I would assume stroke width for a line would be 1 or greater. Why would you be able to drop this down to 0? But you can. It doesn't make sense to me, but that's the reason that this technique works. You can make a stroke width of 0, which disappears the line. Other than this weird technique that I'm showing to make hovering data labels, I just never would have thought to even check, because it's just, as a developer, I just always assumed stroke width of 1 or greater would be the range that you're allowed to apply into here. So stroke width of 0 just completely eliminates the line and essentially creates that top label effect that you want. The last two things that I'll mention is kind of a way to maybe help tie the data together. Right now, we have to show something down here if the legend's on. So if you want this value here in this color to tie to these things at the top, you can turn on marker. So that puts a dot there. And then if you come over to line values, just go ahead and rename that to, say, grand total. So for people who maybe need a little extra indication of what they're looking at, you can potentially use that as some formatting. Personally, what I do is I rename this to like a dot, and then I just get rid of, I color this white, and that just basically makes this disappear from the bottom. But if you want to, kind of create a correlation between the two or a link between the two, that's one way to do it. And this will now work in focus mode. Any of the filters will work as far as anything on the page, and there will never be a misalignment for the location of that grand total at the top. Any questions on this one?
That's a lot of work just to get the grand total for one bar. Do you know if they are going to implement just a button for get the grand total?
I've asked. They've mentioned before it's on their it's on a list of things. It's on a list of things to do, but I think they have. It's one of those because there is technically a solution that this perfectly works. It's there's nothing wrong with this implementation. It just takes time, and I think it's low priority for them because this works perfectly. Versus if you had to layer visuals, that's one that's broken enough that oh yeah, we see the point of doing it. But because somebody figured out a way to do this, I think the fact that there's a good solution has hindered them actually implementing a checkbox for grand total.
It's so crazy. So some basic features, as always. The default answer is put an idea on the feedback portal, but you have the issue with a lot of other visuals also. If you have the bar charts on horizontal style or so, you also want to have a grand total in any kind, but Excel, it's a one-click action, and here you go a longer route. Yeah,
exactly. And there's no way to implement this on a stacked bar chart, only on a stacked column. So there is a downside for that. The benefit of an implementation of this on any stacked charts would mean that all stacked visuals work with this. And I mean, technically what it is doing is, it is loading the value here twice. I'm actually curious. I haven't looked at the performance, but I am wondering, does this actually calculate once and it puts it into locations, or does it have to calculate it twice? So in theory, if you have a really expensive measure, maybe it might actually be doing twice the work to create this visual, because it's rendering or it's processing the number in 2 locations. So that's something I haven't dived into to check, but that could be one potential downside. All right, let me go ahead. There's no other questions. I want to show you the next couple of ones. These are ones that I actually implemented fairly recently. So the nice, again, is similar to the thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the conversations today. This is very modular. It also means that this talk constantly evolves. So as I come up with a new idea, or do a new video for YouTube that's a really, really cool technique, I will pop out an old option in this presentation and pop in a new one. So if you were to check this out on some user group in a year, there's a good chance, 2 to 4 of the topics that are in here will be completely brand new. It's basically just a showcase of the best and the greatest techniques that I have. These last 2 ones are things that I've come up with recently. Both were client requests. That's actually one reason that if I had a choice, I never want to give up development completely. I think going completely to training does start to dull the edge of a knife a little bit for your skill set, because it's a lot of the techniques and other things that I come up with. I don't often think of the scenarios of limitations of the tool until a customer says, I used to do this thing this way. How can you make this in Power BI? And I never would have thought of doing this way with these 2 visuals. But now that I'm forced to, let me figure out how to smash some stuff together and get this to work. The thing that we have in front of us is a technique from a client where they wanted one button to click at the top that toggles between quarter, month, and day. So they wanted to be able to easily change any of the hierarchy levels for these visuals. And like, oh, well, I never really thought of using, creating buttons for that, but how would I do this? And I figured out how to use bookmarks. One thing that bookmarks captures under its data capture, because it can capture data, it captures visibility, and it captures page. So those are the three states that it takes a picture of whenever you create one. And part of the data capture is actually what level of the hierarchy you're at. So it, and again, if I was to redesign this in a perfect world, I would love to have 4 states. I want data to be completely untouched as far as filters goes. That should be its own category. And then like hierarchy would be nice if that's its own independent state, because there are some unique scenarios where they might overlap and cause some issues potentially. But I like the fact that at least for now I can use bookmarks to en masse basically transfer the level of all visuals on the page from different levels of a hierarchy. In this case, it's date. You could also do this with product or categories. It's really just, if you want to migrate the hierarchy level on more than one visual at a time. So that's what I ended up creating on this one, the nice and easy buttons at the top to give kind of these 3 perspectives in here. Again, there are a lot of things where, I'll show a page that has many different techniques on it. Like as an example, this page kind of has buttons that dynamically like toggle active and inactive. It's a great way that I build these to show the user month is selected because it's darker. I'm not going to go through the creation of the buttons themselves. I'll just briefly mention the fact that what I actually have is each thing up here. There's actually 2 buttons in that spot. There's one version of the button that's light, with these little effects on it. And there's another version that's, just completely colored dark that doesn't do anything when you click it. And the only thing that is happening is all of the visuals on the page change their hierarchy level when I activate the bookmark. And the other thing that happens is I toggle between one of the 2 buttons that are at the top for each of these sections. So when I click month, the one that I click disappears, and the one that's darker appears. So the visibility between those is toggled. The effect basically just looks like I click it and it becomes active, but the actual thing that's happening is it's just switching the visibility between 2 versions of that button in that exact spot there. So it creates a like web-like effect, which is really cool. And again, I won't go into the details of the creation of that, but if you're curious about that, I have a YouTube video walking through exactly that. But I just want to show you at least is the bookmark creation itself. So let me go ahead and open that up. As you can see, I just have those 3 bookmarks that are here. But I'm going to go ahead and just create one bookmark. There we go. Let me open up my selection pane too. And here you can actually observe the thing that I'm talking about. So these buttons up here, all of my buttons that are grouped together, I have 2 versions, selected and not selected for each one. And you can see that for each of the month, quarter, and day, there's one visible, one invisible. So I just toggle the selections of that. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to start the setup of, let's say I want to create the bookmark for the month level. I go over here. I'm going to toggle all these down to month. One, two, 3, and 4. There we go. Now, I want the button to also show the correct button up here. So I'm going to start by turning off quarter selected. There you go. So I don't want the active one anymore. I want the inactive one to show for quarter once I toggle my month level. And then for my month button, I want the selected to be on. I want the non-selected to be off. So you can see like I'm setting up the environment to capture for this perspective of bookmarking. So now this is what I want the page to look like when I toggle the month button. So the other technique as a pro tip that I would recommend is near universally, whenever you have a bookmark created, this is something that you always, almost always want to have checked. Very, very rarely do I ever have all visuals selected. What I do is I make a selection of the visuals that I care to update with the bookmark. First in the selection pane, I basically, multi-select all of them, and then I change this to selected visuals. That way, especially with data or anything else, any other visuals that aren't part of the update process that I'm wanting to change, they won't be affected. They're as an example, like the slicer value won't get reset, or other visuals hierarchies that you might have adjusted separately, those won't get reset either, because you don't want to accidentally apply changes to visuals that that shouldn't be getting affected. So it's a very, very good and recommended practice to select the visuals that you care about for this particular bookmark, and then make sure that selected visuals is checked. So I'm going to go ahead and start the process. I'm going to select that one. I'm going to hold Shift. I'm going to select those. And then the 4 visuals here that I care about to update for hierarchy levels are 1, 2, 3, and 4. One thing you can actually do too, it's a recent feature in Power BI, just to let you know, oh my God, you finally have this thing. That is amazing to have the lasso tool to select. Like, I was so happy when that was finally an option. So you can drag and drop if you want to do that, but I generally just use the selection pane to make my selections. Add a bookmark. I don't care about the name for the moment because this is just more of a demonstration. And then, like I said, what you would want to do is make sure that selected visuals is toggled. And the 2 things that you need to have is you need to have data, because that's going to change the hierarchy level for you. And display is the thing that's going to change the button selection for you. Technically, you don't need current page because this bookmark's not going to get toggled on a different page. So there's no reason for it to jump back to here. So if you really want to clean house and have everything unchecked that you don't need, you can unselect that. But these 2 need to be toggled for this specific scenario. So we can test it. I'm going to go to quarter view again. Okay, and then I'll zoom out. If I click bookmark 4 that I just made, there's that month view selection. And then it's just a matter of, for the inactive buttons, you just want to make sure that the action just has the, appropriate bookmark assigned to it. So, any questions on this one?
Reid, have you experienced that when you try to create a new bookmark, you usually have some of the items pre-selected in the selection pane already, and you want to readjust if they are visible or not. And if you click this visibility icon, this eye, then sometimes the selection, the item keeps being selected, and sometimes the selection disappears, like this one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's inconsistent. I agree.
That drives me crazy all the time, especially when you don't notice that it happened, and you update the bookmark, and it doesn't happen like you want it on the report page. It's I'm not the only one who has problems with it, right?
Oh, interesting. It actually looks pretty consistent. The first one I click, the selection stays. The second one I click, selection disappears. Third one I click, selection stays. It seems like there's a pattern. Like, so if I click this, it disappears. Maybe now it's okay, now they're all going away. Yeah, it's very inconsistent. I know, I agree. The first few times I started to do that, because I totally get if you click on the canvas or something else, you unselect everything.
Yeah, for sure.
But if you perfectly click this symbol, it should not remove your selection. And so like that has bugged me. I filed a report. I filed feedback with the team. They haven't changed it yet, but I agree. It's that's something to look out for. Is as you continue to make bookmarks, you really need to make sure that you check again that your selections are still there, especially if you're doing anything with toggle visibility, because that one stayed. That one, nope, that stayed. Yeah, like it's you never know when it's gonna. You never know when it's gonna get rid of them.
And it's exactly your scenario. You have this couple of items, this 4 diagrams, visuals, and your buttons, and it's always those number of items, and you just want to change the visibility. So, and it could be so easy, but it isn't.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's a matter of, you basically make your selection and then go through, look for and then hold control and reselect them. So good call out. I forgot that's definitely an annoyance of this one. Once they're set up, thankfully it works fine. I've actually also found that previously, if I did a selection like this, and in the future I wanted to add this new visual, that wouldn't be captured as part of the selected visual selection. I'd have to actually make an entirely new bookmark to include these new things, but the update option does work really well. I've yet to experience an issue where any active selection and any new configurations over here will always get updated to include that, even in the option of what it considers to be actively selected visuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
bookmarks are probably one of my favorite features in Power BI. They're also one of the hardest features to implement correctly. It's so nuanced, and there's so many there's so many ways to forget one selection or one filter, and you can't really track it easily. The only way to do it is just to test it and see like if anything broke or anything is acting unexpectedly. Because you don't have a list in your bookmark where you can't click properties and see like a summarized list of everything that it's doing. Like that would be beautiful if there was some way for you to get an actual like list of the code of visuals A, B, and C, filters 1, 2, and 3. But that it's just not. They don't expose that. Any other questions on this one before I switch to the next one? Go ahead and, Lars, what time do we have until normally? Just can I also save time for wrap up and any like questions at the end?
I think it's scheduled until 9:30, but take as much time as you need, I think.
Okay, so about another 40 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, let me enlarge this. So again, this is kind of another one where I was given a client scenario where they gave me a mock-up of a visual that they wanted to have looking like this, specifically these little cards that we have here at the bottom. I'd never really seen that idea before, but they wanted essentially a value, a status bar, the title, and then, just some kind of text output at the bottom, basically a KPI that's displayed. And I had yet to encounter a scenario where I needed to build something like this, but I figured out a way using some native visuals in Power BI to essentially achieve this effect. Originally, what I had done to get this is I had used 3 visuals to accomplish this. Let me go ahead and I want to show you the previous version that I had used, but then again, I want to mention the reasons why I ended up, making a better version of this. So technically, this is 3 different visuals. They're kind of layered together to create a thinner bar, but I stacked 3 visuals together. Perfect effect. It's a single value card. I actually used a clever way of formatting a button to put that in here for the bar in the middle, and then a single value card at the bottom. But as I mentioned in the previous video, one of the issues with this many visuals is if I have like 8 of these cards, that's 8 times 3 visuals that's on my page. So 24 visuals would be needed to have 8 of these cards at the top of the page. It's not going to ruin the report, but it's certainly going to slow down the report. The more visuals you have, slower the report will render in your web browser. So I was trying really, really hard to figure out like how can I do this with just 2 visuals. Essentially, I wanted to figure out how to combine the button here and a card at the top with the value. So the second version that I built, the one that I'm currently using, is with 2 visuals in here. There's a few things that I did that, again, I found some clever ways to build this out, but let me go ahead and pop this over here. Good enough. Let me turn to my selection pane. Thank you. There we are. So 2 visuals in here. I have button at the top, and I have the thing here at the bottom. So the reason this is actually working, first let me just kind of show you, one piece at a time and the things that I did for this. So to start with, I just want to talk about the line. I think that was the most unique thing to implement into this, but it gives you an idea that like a button doesn't just have to be a button. You could actually turn a button into some kind of a visual. So, the actual button itself has a fill color that I'll mention in a sec, or I'll show you the measure, but that's just a really, really thin button. All I did is, I just scooted this up to, there we go, to that size. I just made it really thin and really wide. I essentially created the button turned the button into a bar, and with conditional formatting in Power BI, the beautiful thing is there are so many things in Power BI that can have conditional formatting applied to it, where you can use a measure to define hex code or hex colors, and that basically just tells it what color to include. Let me just get that window to pop up. There we are. So if you've not used this yet, I actually have a video explicitly talking about field values in Power BI, but essentially what that means is you can format by field value. So there is a DAX measure that as long as it returns just different hex codes, hashtag, whatever series of characters that represents a color, you can specify that in here. You have that as a field. You apply that in here, and then the code itself is just, however simple or complex you want it. Open this up. I'll just show you one as an example. Not too much is going on in here. There we are. And there we go. So just two colors. There's green, there's red, and a basic if statement. If the variation is, greater than equal to 0, green, otherwise red. You could observe that here, and actually where it changes. If I was to click on a few of these. There we go. You can see green showing up. Same thing. So it will change color each time the filter logic changes. So it allows you to create the dynamic color change. You can have 1, 5, 50 colors, as many as you want. But you can apply that to the background or the fill color of the button. So I basically completely use the button for an entirely different purpose. Its original design was to have something to click on for bookmarks or other stuff. But I found a way to do that with the fill, because at the moment with background color, there's a few other visuals that you can use for this, but I could have done this with a button. I could have done this with a text box. Either way, I'm basically creating a thin sliver of a visual that just has a color that changes with that. Now, originally, on top of this, I had to add a card at the top, a single value card, to return this number. But that was 3 visuals, and I was trying to avoid that. So instead, what I figured out how to do, again with conditional formatting, it's one of the greatest features in Power BI, is applying dynamic formatting, dynamic color changes. Titles can have dynamic text that's provided into there. And text is the key word here. Text meaning that you can supply a measure that returns a text value that will be then basically used and shown in a card. So that thing that I have up here was actually a completed amount value. The title itself is the actual number, but I have formatted it to text so I could actually use it instead of a static title. Checking over here. There we are. Simply wrap that in a format, which converts it from a number to text, and that shows at the top. In my tests, when I ran this with the performance analyzer, the format basically, it adds almost no milliseconds as far as the processing time it takes for the stacks measure to render. However, the visual on the page loading, it dropped that by about 200 to 300 milliseconds. So it had an increase of about 30 to 40% for render time for the card when I reduced it from 3 visuals to 2. So the one, I would say, downside is to have this value showing is you do need a new version of the measure that is formatted as text. You probably have an original version of amount that's an actual number for other charts and visuals. But for the title for this one card, you would just need a second measure to supply it to that. So, think of it as a pro con. I personally would rather have my page render faster. It's not that big of a deal to have a few extra measures in your model for some purposes, and then you get a lot better of a speed boost for the processing by the time the report consumers are using this. So it's a clever way to basically create a card out of the title. 2 non-out-of-box solutions where the button's getting used for a bar, and the title for that button is the actual card returning a numerical value. And the bottom one is basically just a pretty standard single value card. Not anything is going on other than I have a standard title for the actual thing in the middle, and then the measure is just something where I concatenated a few different values to give it a little bit of pizzazz and to make it look a little fancier and more like a KPI. So not too much is happening in here. Couple of variables, but just a bit of formatting magic. So I basically have a percentage. I have whatever that target value is, which is shown in there, and then I include a couple of ASCII arrows in here, up or down. So basically the entire thing gets concatenated, and I return that nice little pretty text string that's at the bottom. Percentage, up or down, and then versus plan and whatever the plan number was. But this can be anything. It just happened to be what the business requirements were needed from them. This is probably one of the more layered ones that I've done, but again, I think it shows a really fun and clever way to just have very non-native solutions for visuals that are in Power BI that really were never intended to be used this way, but work very, very well given unique business requirements. As far as this one goes, are there any questions on some of the stuff that I've done? I know I showed quite a few different techniques on this.
I think somebody was asking something. No, it doesn't look like. I'm missing the emojis, but it's a pretty interesting solution.
You can actually do emojis too in here. There's you can copy.
Yeah, I know. This is why I was playing jokes on it.
Yeah, these are actually safer to use. I actually like because there are emoji characters, and the issue with those is depending on your operating system, there's different icons that will render. So the smiley face on Windows is different than the smiley face on Mac or Linux or Firefox. So if somebody's really picky about the look of them, it can change a lot, and some of them don't always render on mobile. The actual just like text characters, these ones, they can be color formatted, because a smiley emoji, you can't change it from red to green to blue. It's just the color that is rendered from the system. These more basic just symbols are universal. They'll work on mobile and anything else. They don't change depending on your operating system, and they're treated just as regular text. And I think they're a lot safer to implement versus like the phone emojis.
Yeah, it was more a joke, more or less.
But it's a good conversation piece, because like that's technically what I'm doing right here, is that this could have been swapped out for an emoji if I wanted to.
I have one question on that one, what I'm thinking about. This kind of, let's say, composite visuals here. I have on my to-do list since long time to test that. How is it called? Charticulator from that website from Power.
Yeah.
Does anyone have good or bad experience with them? Because that seems to be the solution, no? So to build a custom visual, clicky. But I think it's not so easy, no?
There is a learning curve to the tool. I mean, you don't have to code. It's all UI when you build it out. But it works really well for the times where there is a custom visual that needs to be built, and your client doesn't want to spend $8,000 for a custom visual shop to build it for them. The Charticulator can build, unique like multi-axis line charts or dual axis column charts, like where you can have a stacked column and clustered column together. Like it can do a lot of those, and it does it well. The tool was built by Microsoft originally, and then Mike Carlo at Power BI Tips reskinned it, and he's hosting it on his site. But it was a tool built originally by one of the Microsoft teams, and it's a very useful tool if you ever run into a scenario where you need a really custom visual that can't be built by compositing them together like I did, and there's no custom visual in the store that quite accomplishes that.
Yeah, I think there's still a gap on the KPI visualization side. No? Even if the Zebra BI visuals, an example, they are so cool, but if you make a multi-layer dashboard where you have a KPI page and then a detail page, that KPIs, I had so many projects where I just want to have a KPI with the actual, the variance regarding budget and the variance regarding last year. And I didn't find any visual to do that. And it's always, like you mentioned, overlaying multiple visuals, and then you get that pain with the performance. That would be really a good idea to create such a visual and solid.
Yeah, and I would say for some of the KPI stuff, I'm assuming you've already looked at them, but OKViz does make a couple of really good sparklines and KPI cards that work pretty well. Like again, the downside is if the variance is over on the right, but like, well, no, I want the variance above it or below it. Like sometimes you don't have quite that flexibility outside of stacking visuals yourself, but there are a couple of good KPI cards that are in the custom visual store that do work pretty well for some more advanced small multiples or metrics that are shown in there.
But they are really, really slow. I love the cards by OKViz. I used it in a couple of projects, but as you said in the beginning, customers like to have many of them. And if you have 4, 5, 6, they are loading so much slower than big tables or big matrices, for instance. Yeah, and I had to remove them because they slowed the report down so much. It wasn't we couldn't use it.
Yeah, exactly. It's that the scalability of them is often just not as good as the native ones. And it's actually surprising with OKViz, just for the fact that I would consider them one of the better shops out there for making visualizations. The person they have that builds them is really skilled.
Yeah, I think his name is Daniele or Danielle. I don't know how to pronounce it in Italian name. But the thing is that it is not certified. And as long as it's not certified, it's put in a sandbox. And that makes them so slow.
Ah, okay.
Oh, I didn't actually realize that. So it's not even the code in the JSON file. It's
it could be, but that's not the main problem. Yeah.
Okay. That's good to know. So it's because they're isolated. I'm assuming for security reasons. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's a security problem.
Okay, that's really good to know. So you could build the fastest custom visual, but you're still going to hit a performance impact if you're not certified.
Yeah.
Good to know. Any other questions on this one? There are. I'm also just going to spin up some of my other things in advance and close some of these down. Free up some of my RAM. Should have time for, probably a couple more.
By the way, I'm trying to get someone for this gesticulator topic for one of the next user group meetings.
I'd say just go get Mike Carlo.
Yeah, I could try. I was trying to reach Nick Snap. I'm sure you know him from Twitter.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Either of them would be great for that. I know Mike's really busy at the moment, so he's probably less likely. But
yeah.
All right. So for this one is it's actually again using that title for dynamic. The dynamic title that I showed previously, where I actually used the title and some measures to create a KPI value sitting at the top. So in this case, I'm actually using dynamic titles in my report tooltips page to give this effect. We can actually create a title that changes the value and actually has basically the total for whatever section that I'm loading in the title of the visual that's being rendered. So let me actually show you about that. So it combines both report tooltip pages and some little DAX formatting magic in here. Come over here. Standard visual that we have, and there's your emoji large that we have there in the top.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I add them sometimes. It's like it's a little bit of it's like a piece. It's a piece of flair. It adds a little bit of color magic to something that otherwise could be a bit more boring. And in here we have, just like we've seen before, title section, and then little FFX symbol that's here at the bottom. Come on. There we go. Same thing we've seen before, field value. And then there is a measure that's basically a title that's being funneled into that. Taking a quick look at this. You can see this actually shows a few different techniques. We can see that it's, has the standard value that I'm having concatenated on the right. By the way, if you ever return text values in anything, you have to have the format in here. If I just did this, it would be 59707 and a bunch of decimals after it. Any formatting that originally is in the measure will not get passed through to a new calculation if you are converting it to any text value in a concatenation. So it has to be wrapped in some format to keep that user-friendly look to it. And then the thing that I have at the end here, you can actually do two techniques. You can just do unichar like this and then get the number online for it. I used to do this. You can also actually directly from any website copy and paste the symbol and just put that between two quotes, and that will also work as well. So either one of those will return the symbol in the actual title that essentially you're seeing down here at the bottom. And the reason that it's changing is just like with any other report tooltip, what you have is the filter context that unfortunately does not pass through in the visual header, but it does pass through when you hover over these elements. Like the data in the chart is getting filtered, and the title itself is also still accepting the filter coming from this visual. So in this case, I have the 3 quadrants, and that is updating my number and updating the chart itself. So you can kind of create a dynamic title, and this is one way to reduce visuals. rather than needing to have the chart on that page, plus let's say a couple cards at the top, I could just in theory include any data labeling that I might want just in the title itself. So it's a nice way to kind of combine the two of them and, you know, kind of use more dynamic titling for the visuals themselves. Pretty straightforward one that kind of built on the last conversation we have, but just shows you another way to kind of combine different features together to, you know, to create a more dynamic report environment for your end users. And then, you know, just gives you an example of kind of using an emoji if you want to, you know, add something that's just a little bit of like a kind of an icon, just to, you know, make it seem a little bit more, you know, artistic in that sense, or something that often like CEOs and other execs like, because they, you know, they like pretty things. Any questions on this one? All right. No questions on this. I'll go ahead and spin up.
Sorry, I was muted. I had one.
Yeah.
I was talking. I was talking to myself for 10 seconds. How do you highlight for your users that a visualization has a tooltip? Do you do something like this? Because if you have a couple of visualizations on your report page and only one has a tooltip, it's sometimes hard to notice that.
It's a great question. So I've often actually used the title to indicate that. So I'll sometimes do, you know, include like a little I, kind of like a little information there. Or I'll include something in the title that indicates to that. Or there actually is an emoji for this too. So maybe like a little symbol that shows that, but some indication or like an asterisk or something else that's in the title itself that indicates that, you know, this is going to have a, you know, some kind of you know, dynamic tooltip or something else in here. So, you know, these are the best way that I found to add like guiding markers to indicate that there's something more in depth in it to look at it in this specific visual.
And do you distinguish between drill through, tooltip, or something, or is it always the same?
So far, I've just used the eyes for the tooltip ones. The drill through, at least now, there is. I know they're starting to have those pop-ups. Like as an example, if you hover over this, there's the right click to drill through. That's been very helpful. But I've yet to come up with a standard for the symbols at the top. But you know, I think that's kind of more based on the client, because I've had people to ask for different things, so I've not kind of created a standard myself. But title indications in the title for any of those is usually some variation of a solution is implemented there.
Yeah, nice and easy.
What about you?
Honestly, I didn't have a customer yet who wanted to get this indication. They just used it for themselves, only small teams, so they knew which visual has tooltips, which not. But if you roll it out to more clients inside the company, this is necessary. What I really like to use is these overlay documentations. Pretty sure you have seen that. I don't remember the name. It's a colleague of Miguel Myers from the CAT team at Microsoft Power BI. Yep. And they have this overlay effect to document which element on the report page does what. I like this a lot, and this is what I use usually.
Okay, nice. Yeah, and it's nice as there's so many different ways to kind of integrate this stuff, just depending on what's most useful for the end user and which info like kind of layered effect is the most intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
All right, last one. One of the ones that I've actually been using a few years now, but it's a way to create like layered visuals. Again, there's your little emoji that you love, Lars. But what I had is I had a page that I didn't have much room with, and I want to start just by saying that report pages in general, they're limited space. You know, you have a canvas, but you have defined borders. You shouldn't typically, you know, add scroll bars or anything else to them and make them bigger to fit more stuff. So I was trying to figure out, you know, how to display as much information in as small of a space, compact of a space as possible, but also without having it be noisy or anything else. And you know, one of the cards that I commonly use in here is this visual here, which is in fact actually a standard single value card, but also the spark line from OKViz that I actually really like. It's you know, I love the smooth line, and it's a great way to just, you know, have a tiny little trend indicator that's at the bottom there, and basically layering these two together. Downside is, of course, you have more visuals, but for certain scenarios, this card was significantly smaller in height than the standard KPI card that they have or anything else, because those were much taller and required a lot more room, and it just encroached, or it took up space that I didn't want. So it's a great example of just like layering two visuals together to make one visual from it. The kind of the clever techniques that came from this, though, is sparkline is just as is. That's just sitting there, not much formatting going on. But the top card, unfortunately, you don't have an alignment option. There is no middle, top, or bottom for your card. That's not just something that they have available. So the kind of the clever technique that I was able to implement to get it to move up is actually turning on category label. By default, it's going to show like that. If you make the card bigger, it stays in the center. It stays center aligned. There is no alignment option. So I actually turned this on. I set this to white, because the actual the label's in there. I actually turned that to black. It's down there. And then using the size, you actually notice that if I reduce the size, it lowers it down. So I actually use the text size to essentially scoot the text up on the card, allowing me to basically give it that space needed for the spark line to show at the bottom. So a couple things, in here as far as layering goes, adding that spark line to it, but I think it gives you an idea to, if you need to free up space on the default card in Power BI, you can use the category label, color it the same background color, and that will allow you to essentially get a top alignment with it to potentially include some other visual below it without having to add like a third visual for a background or anything else like that. And the last thing I'll just show for this is just the measure. So again, you can see the effect that I'm doing, and this one should have, there you go. Yeah, so like I said, you can actually copy and paste the emoji character directly into this. I will say, as an annoyance, it bothers me that the up arrow is red and the down arrow is red for the charts that are available, and you can't change the color of those. Emojis are rendered exactly like the operating system would. There's no way to adjust that. I think this should be a neutral color. It should definitely not be red. If anything, the downward trend should be red. But those are basically just shown as a KPI next to the value to show increase or decrease. If you wanted to add like some fancy KPI stuff, I'm just really checking to see for the previous month, was there a delta up or was there a delta down as far as an increase or decrease in data, and that's just what that's representing there. But the broader conversation around this one is really just kind of the clever layering you can do between the two of them, and just showing you that DAX can be a lot richer than just a number. You can include any kind of icon that you want in there to give kind of trend indicators on top of the data itself. I think we're just about a good time to probably wrap up with this as our last one. Are there any questions on this before we start going into giving you some links and everything else? While you're thinking of that, let me go ahead and just pop up my links. So a couple of links in here that I want to give all of you. At least for the few slides that I have, the presentation PDF will be available on my Speaking Events page. And that will include the last page in this deck has the links to all of the YouTube videos and other ones of the things that I haven't covered today. So there's a lot of additional resources. That QR code will take you straight to my website. There's also a few links in here for the consulting services that I engage with. Plus, I actually sell a lot of files and templates, from calendar templates to reports built off of Google Analytics or Spotify and Uber and various other ones that are all available on my website. I do provide for anybody that takes their time to just hang out and talk with me and attend these sessions. You guys get a 30% discount code on anything from my site. That will be available from today through 30 days from now. So about 1 month is when it's active, that you're welcome to use. I also have the YouTube channel that I mentioned that will have all the videos available for everything that I talk about with Power BI. New video that comes out every Tuesday related to that. And I encourage you to please reach out on LinkedIn if you ever have any questions for me. I want to help you out as much as possible with getting started in Power BI, and that's how honestly I learned with a lot of this stuff. So it's my way of helping to give back to the community and just trying to help people out when they're going through their Power BI journey. The only other thing that I'll show right here is I also do enter anybody from a user group into a raffle. So this takes you to a web page to sign up for my blog, totally free. And in exchange, I pick a name from a hat, so to speak. And the name that gets drawn from that will get 1 hour. We'll schedule a 1 hour Zoom call with you, and we can talk shop, talk Power BI. I can help you out with DAX problems. You can ask me questions about visualizations. You basically just have an hour of consulting from me to pick my brain on anything. So it's a nice way to kind of give you a chance to maybe pick my brain a bit, and it helps me out just by getting me some additional blog subscribers as well. So you're welcome to sign up for that, and potentially get the option to win the consulting hour. Other than that, like I said, this PDF will, when you go download it, it will have all these references for you. So if you are interested in the YouTube links for these, I would encourage you to go download the PDF from my website that I have here as the link. With that, though, that's the end of the presentation. So are there any questions that I can answer for you now, either about the topics that I've covered or just Power BI in general?
No questions.
I have no questions, but I'd like to thank you very much. This was very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate all of you for attending and taking time out of your evening for this as well.
It was impressive how you would want to try this out right away. So
Yeah.
I don't want to put questions, but put my hands on the keyboard. But my family's waiting for me. But some other time I'll try this.
Yeah, and it's a great sandbox environment, especially once you realize that layering is an option. Like that was a big epiphany for me years ago. Is, oh wait, the objects can touch each other. They can be on top of each other. Because I started from the universe of I put things next to each other, but I tried to make sure that no lines ever went on top of each other, because I thought that was bad design. And I realized there were so many creative ways to do that would give a really cool result to the end user.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of creativity in your solutions. I wish that in the near future, those things get pretty much easier for us to do by clicking a button or something. But it's good to see that it's possible at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have one question still. Is it so that a lot of your customers actually ask for this kind of design themselves, or are you the one promoting it?
Oh, I mean, a substantial number of the things that I showed you were people asking for certain features, or like, I want that card, but can you make it smaller? Okay, well, let's see if I can layer visuals. That bar that you saw, the card with the little bar line, that was something that was a client request. So that's why I was mentioning, like, I never want to give up development. I train a lot, but I find that I often grow with my skill set quite a bit when I'm given very rigid requirements. Where like, we have to have this, figure out a way to do this thing, and then I'm forced into a wall, and like I have to think really creatively to implement the solution. That's where I learn these new techniques. So I still really appreciate development, because it forces me to adapt Power BI to fit like a square peg in a round hole kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you're seeing the chat on the right side of your screen, but there are many people thanking you for all this input and are saying goodbye.
Yeah, thanks again for everybody for attending. It's been really great, and like I said, I just really enjoy connecting to people that I know are thousands of miles away. So
yeah, all over the globe. Thanks again.
The airplane looks amazing, Jochen. Cool stuff.
I want to do whatever you're doing. You apparently are very successful.
One day that will be real, but not yet. I'm working on it.
So, Reid, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this. Was a pleasure again. And I will. Jochen is a poker leader in Germany too. So, if he wants to get some of your topics into his user group, just have a chat.
I thought about so
yeah,
good to know that there are guys like you which are willing to share, and it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's ever a user group or an event you want me to speak, I just feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or send me an email. It's on my company website, and I'll happily set up a time, sometime in the future to present for you as well.
Great.
Cool. So if there are no further questions, and There's nothing else you want to show us, Reid? With already really a lot. So nice, a lot of many interesting solutions. Then I would thank you for attendance and for your patience, and say thanks for being here, and see you next time.
That was great. Yeah, and have a great night.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks you. Bye bye.